It is a pleasure for me to be here and to present a little bit of our highlights we achieved in let's say our project work over the last couple of months and years. And I think last week actually, when I was at a conference, I was actually asked many times, does Corona, and I think we are in this turbulent times of COVID-19, does it have actually any impact on how companies are acting nowadays? And I come to that in a second, but of course in that story, I think one of the key elements what is now changing are the business models of companies. And one of these elements, of course, is around how can I configure my product, bring my product faster to the market, customize it better to the customer needs, and of course foreseeing the kind of and driving the digital transformation of companies. And therefore I think the idea came up to my mind for this webinar, also really talk about how actually configuration lifecycle management can enable and enrich the digital transformation, or even can speed it up. I will talk a little bit on the story, what we have seen so far, what my clients are doing right now in the market, and how are things changing in the last 12 months. And I think one of the key elements that we talked, I think, let's say in July, August, to 700 CEOs in the world about how the COVID situation is changing or impacting their business. And I think, and what are they actually doing now? And if you look on the left, one of the key elements is really prioritizing business models that are digital flexible. Yeah, going really down the path of digitizing, being with really doing more on this side of the business side, digitizing that. On the other side, on the right side, if you look, what are they looking for? They look for a collaborative way, how to collaborate internally, but also with partners, and how to automate. And I think if you look on these sides of the medal, that means you talk about digital business models, and digital business models mean that there's maybe also not even the salesperson physically at the home of a person, because the people are now sitting at home. The people want to still buy a product, they still want to configure a product or even a machine. So I think now you can imagine this is of course a huge driver on bringing digitalization forward. And if that's one of the slides I like to show to most of my clients, and I also show this in the webinar, it's if you look at a typical company at this kind of value chain, from really selling or getting the idea to the market, right, getting the R&D side, then configuring the product, on sell the product, then you do all about the engineering, operations planning, procurement, and so on, until you go to the after sales and service. You bring the product to the market, to your customer, and you do the service and the second life. And if you look at all the complete value chain, you see on each step that there's a dedicated tool leading it, right? On number one, on the sales side, it's all about the CRM tool, customer relationship management. On the engineering side, it's all about the product lifecycle management. And then of course you go, let's say, to 4, 5, 6, 7, right? The procurement side, you talk about the procurement suite or ERP, you talk about the MES, for the production, and for the installation, the service pool management, and so on. But if you look at the value chain, that means already you have several tools in place at a company that somehow, if you want to come to a digital twin, or if you want to come to the point that you want to configure a solution around these different tools, you need to have one digital backbone. Yeah, and that's of course, and I think it's configuration lifecycle management is one of this typical digital backbones capabilities, really connecting all the different tools with all the different data models, and bring them as in a linking pin together, so you can actually configure it and directly place the order, for example, in the manufacturing plant to execute that, yeah, and deliver to the customer. And I think that's one of the key elements, and I will show you in a bit also two client examples where we actually have achieved that. Of course, we can talk about what are the benefits, right? I mean, if you look at the PLM side, I think, which is now really coming from the, let's say now 20 years old at a lot of companies, right? Still this old SAP PLM solution. This has changed dramatically over the last 5 years, being on the cloud, being able really to look more on the end-to-end life cycle, including the digital twin, including, let's say, service models. It's really about maximizing the modularization as a design objective, right? Being faster respondents to the customer, bundle procurement volumes, reduce basically existing configuration, and so on. And of course, key elements of that are integrating with the ERP, being multi-cut integrative, right? Integrating software development cycles, being now in 3D, having rule-based configuration capabilities. And being also, of course, able to manage all the overall product portfolio. If you look at the benefits, they are also quite clear, right? Going really in the market there, right? Having earlier product releases, being faster in the market by up to 70%, reduce the time to market massively, optimizing the cost base on COGS, scrap reduction, labor efficiency, and so on. So it is actually can drive a lot of benefits, but it only works again if you link it to the ERP, if you link it to the CRM. And that's I think, and that's one thing which is quite true in the world. I think there's still not one company out there who successfully managed to integrate the CRM tool with the ERP, with the PLM tool, and with an MES, for example, for the manufacturing side. So they're all different because they come from different ages, from the 90s with the ERP, from 2000 the PLM, and so on. So, but they are not fully connected. And now through, for example, S/4HANA, I think one of the elements is you have to redesign the architecture anyhow. And that's also a benefit for most of the customers. If you redesign anyhow your tool landscape, I think it's now the right time to think, okay, I have all the digital business models in the future I want to serve. So what are my impacts and implications on my life cycle? What are my impacts? How do I want to sell my products to the market? How do I want to serve these digital business models? So which is really one of the drivers on really going down the path of connecting all the different tools with each other. And PLM just being one example. And if you look at our digital product development study, and that's the only slide I show on that, we do every other year in our, let's say this time in our European market. So that was, we've done the study the last year. Next year there will be a new study where we talk to 500 people or 500 companies and ask what are the tools that bring the most value in the development phases. And I think this kind of picture will change every 2 years, but you can see in that it's always very depending on which phase you're in, from concept to specification until you go to market. Of course, the tools are changing, but 2 years ago, nobody would have mentioned configuration lifecycle management, or the PLM. Of course, people would have mentioned, digital twin. Maybe 2 years ago, people thought about it. 4 years ago, it was still a long story, but now companies are realizing it. So if you look at the left side, what brings basically on the right side, what brings actually most value, people identify, okay, data analytics is important, the digital twin is important, of course, other things like co-creation and so on, but configuration lifecycle management was the first time mentioned in our study as being one of the key drivers for being beneficial going forward. So I think that's also showing, and I think I'm very interested how this picture will look in 2 years from now or next year, how this has changed. I could imagine that CLM will get even more important. One of our clients, and that's maybe one example, one of the 2 examples I will show to you, they had the challenge, and that's Krone. That's one of the commercial, that's the second largest commercial vehicle supplier in the market in Europe, after Schmitz Cargo Bull. So they're actually producing trailers. And I think what is very important on this market, it's still kind of a standard, or you try to have a standard product, but depending what you're transporting and depending what are the requirements, each trailer in the end looks very different. So they produce basically 60,000 trailers per year, but they have they have millions of variations, and there's no single trailer looks like another one. Of course, if you look on the street, they still look kind of similar, but in the end, the components they're built of are very different. So they had the challenge that, of course, the market requirements are even growing. The more things you transport, if it's water or if it's paper, it's a totally different requirement. So you had to always build a manual based on the customer request. It was always the manual engineering team was manually updating the drawings, right? The work instructions for manufacturing, we're bringing it down to the shop floor, they're producing that, and then once it's finished, it was basically sent to the customer. And the market requirements are massively growing. That was actually one of the key drivers. So in that challenge, so the idea was born based on the market requirements and individualization. Can I still standardize something in that? Can I still configure maybe all my solutions? Yeah, so that was the first idea. Okay, I want to basically build a configurator for the sales that I can immediately tell the customer when my product is available, and of course I can configure it in standard terms. Yeah, and what are my standard solutions pre-configured basically from a standard offering? Okay, I want to produce paper. What does the standard solution look like for paper transport, and so on. So that was the first idea, and the second was, of course, I need to place the order directly in the production and also want immediately let's say the delivery time being considered, and I also of course want to know how much margin I make with this product immediately and so on. So they actually decided on let's say on the new trailer that the trailer, to do that, it needs to be a modular strategy, but it needs to be parameterized, which means I can change dimensions of a component, yeah, the length, the height, yeah, and so on, but it's still the same kind of part number. I think that's one of the elements, but it's parameterized by the dimensions. And the other thing is you need to have kind of a, let's say, knowledge management, yeah, containing basically understanding how I can basically link my manufacturing process to the sales and to the product development side as well as to the sales side. So the option numbers on the sales side need to be linked basically with the different manufacturing facilities and with the R&D side. So that was also very important to link through a knowledge graph kind of all the three tools. Yeah, and in the end, they are now of course at the situation that they have a sales configurator for the first product line, which went go live, which was going live now 2 months ago for the sales team internally, and they now can configure basically most of the product. And I think very importantly for that, so it's very beneficial for the company, but very importantly for that, of course, it was not possible, but just doing, let's say, combination of 1 or 2 vendors. It was really a combination of, let's say, PwC designing the end-to-end processes and designing the capabilities. On the other side, having with Configured a configuration lifecycle management capability, which can basically has all the content about all the variations in it, and then together with Denkbares, who actually provided the knowledge graph, it was in the end possible to provide this overall solution. And was like a 2 to 2.5 year project, but for the first, let's say, product boot, it's now live. And if you see that in the end, the target, looking on the next slide, it's all about creating, and I think for the Krone trailer, it was only for, let's say, selling the product, but you can also, of course, imagine it can go one step ahead, really being let's say, a digital twin for now, if you want to have basically also the service model behind it. Yeah, and therefore you need to connect, of course, with this knowledge graph. You can also connect not only with this variation tree, you can not only connect the different tools, but you can also make sure that you have basically, once this product is produced, you have a digital twin, of course, as it is produced, but you can also enrich this later with all the service information and can build it for the service side. And having said that, I think the other side of the medal is, yeah, Krone is now very hardware focused, but of course we have other clients who also have the piece on the software side, so they need to combine not only the hardware side from a product lifecycle management, but also, of course, the application lifecycle management if you come from a software perspective. And I think that's one of the nice elements where you can also combine these two elements together. And I think also in the configuration, it gets more and more important that you can also configure, of course, the software and the hardware. And at this client, I think I cannot show, let's say I cannot show the name, but you can imagine it is a, let's say, Swedish company, one of the largest, let's say, energy utility and automation market providers with 30-40 billion revenue. One of the competitors is Siemens. For them, we actually created now a very, very nice end-to-end solution with a digital twin in the end for the service model. But if you look at this picture, I will show it a little bit in a second. It shows that we combined for this solution a lot of different layers. So the target of this solution was, or is, basically to having a configuration, of course, for the sales side in the beginning, selling the, let's say, the engineer to order, configure to order product to the sales, with the sales team to the customer, having their 3D model and so on, but also at the same time building the service twin for maintaining the solution once it's sold and installed at the client, basically over the life cycle of 30-40 years. The application behind this, it's for example, it's for example automation robot line for the car manufacturing industry, or it can be basically in the power utility market, a substation, for example. And to do that, I think it was very important to combine on the left side, if you look at the graph, really let's say all the CAD tools, integrating the CAD tools, then in a 4-layer system, which you see in the middle with this orange bar around. We have basically a visualization layer. You have a solution lifecycle management tool, which is a PLM for the hardware piece. You have the application lifecycle management for all the software components. And here on top, you have a BIM, a building information management for all the civil and construction side. And that all these features are then combined on the right side in a configuration where you can actually configure this overall solution and basically on the customer need. And of course, building up, let's say, this digital twin on the end-to-end side. And of course, improvement levers, I think, are also clear, right? It's harmonization of the different product in the product development area of the cycles. It's of course standardization, it's digitalization of the process and automation, and has of course a lot of capabilities in reducing basically the requirements management and the redundancy of the work between the different departments and so on. So the benefit of that case is really it's like 30%, 40% engineering time reduction. It's top line growth. It is basically automation degree of the process, which was like 15% before. It's now at 60% to 70% of the process, and you have basically the idea that 80% of the complete offering can go through a configuration. Why it was before, it was like 10%, and now it's like 80%. Standard 20% are still engineered to order, which you need to customize manually. And that's, I think, one of the elements. And if you look at this architecture, it's already very detailed, but you can see here, you have on top, of course, the CRM, the ERP, the MES, all the different tools. And if you look at the configuration lifecycle management, it starts, of course, always at the left, coming from this as required, what the customer wants, right? With your all 150% BOM, go all the way down, basically from as designed to as planned, and then how the customer is ordering it, how customer is building it, or how it has been as built, and then later as maintained, to basically make sure that you have the complete life cycle being managed. And of course, configuration lifecycle management can play a big role in that from the beginning to the end. But if you want to have a digital solution for the life cycle, kind of an architecture, high-level architecture, in the end could look like this. And And I think one of the last two slides I want to mention there is, of course, on one hand side, I think we talked already on the left side on the digital twin, but I think it's very important. You get only a result out of that if you really go down the path, understanding your data, understanding, I mean, I talked yesterday to one of my clients, one of the largest, let's say, manufacturing equipment suppliers in the world, and they are actually, of course, also trying to go down the path, but it's still, I mean, they have a lot of legacy systems, and nobody in the management, in the top management, wanted to work on the master data or data architecture yet. But now they all talk about digitization, and they started to have a web shop, but they cannot roll out the web shop globally for spare parts because it's actually failing, because they don't have a data model, and they have templates in each country in SAP and PLM which are different, so they cannot roll out this web shop globally. And the reason is because they never managed the data architecture behind it. And now, all the way through the digitization, they have to do this now. So they will do now a project for the next 18 months, really building up a standard library data architecture behind it through the different tools, and standardize the taxonomy, so you always know between the different systems that the component A is always a component A independently, if we are talking an SAP, CRM, Salesforce, for example, or the PDM system. It's always, or the BIM system, it's always the same name of the component with the same classification, the same data fields. And I think there also, S/4HANA is, of course, one of the key drivers of changing that, because there the data library structure is behind that. For the master data is more or less fixed, so you need to use it, and it's one library. And of course that brings also the benefit of doing this cross basically with a CLM, for example, across the different tools. But I think that's important. You need to get to a common consolidated data model. And then last but not least, there are different ways of aggregating that. But I think one of the key elements between this, or one of the technologies we now see in the market that work, is then in a combination with a graph database, which combines basically based on all the, let's say, the variations, combining then basically different key elements of the different tools in a brownfield approach as a linking pin. Because of course you can always go greenfield and design everything from new, but what we see, most of our customers have still a brownfield, have still some legacy systems you still need to connect. And one of the elements of that, of course, is really doing this then with a knowledge graph, and you have a kind of a semantic stack between the tools which you have standardized, and with a semantic stack and basically this configuration scheme, you can actually have the capability to combine all the different tools with each other. And I think that's now a very smart solution, and that's why I personally believe in CLM will change the digital transformation over the next year massively, because if you can do that, I think that drives what everyone is looking for, to get this integrated data architecture realized for digital twin, or for enabling your future digital business models. And with having that said, I'm finished with my, let's say, my one-sided presentation, and thank you very much. And now I think I'm open for questions.
What is the difference between a CPQ and a CLM?
A configuration line, or a CPQ tool, typically is this configuration tool. For example, in Salesforce, or if your sales configurator, and that's the front end. In the end, of course, this can be also connected, but that's typically the side to the customer or for the internal sales team, how to configure basic a solution. But that classically doesn't mean it's connected. And in a sales configurator, if you look at the car industry, they have all nice configurators, but they don't place an order directly in the production, nor they manage at the same time. It's the same configuration that is also managed, for example, in the production environment or the R&D environment, which means the CLM is much broader. It connects, let's say, all the tools between each other and make sure that the configuration is also managed over the life cycle. So when updates are happening, it's updated immediately from engineering, it's updated in the configurator, the sales configurator, but it's also updated, for example, then for the shop floor, that they know, okay, there's a new variation, there's a new update of the software, of the electronic components, and also of the work instruction. So I think, long story short, a CLM is really much broader, managing over the life cycle, the configuration, while a CPQ tool is really more the front end, I would say, at least from our definition, on configuring the product to this for the sales side.
Did you observe the changes in the way companies define configurable items? So for example, assemblies or items during the development or after development?
Yeah, I think what is now dramatically changing is that companies are really realizing that, you know, you have to do it as early as possible. And I give that example from Scania. I think in the last, of course, in the past it was a different way, yeah, configuring later and so on. But look at Scania. Scania is one of the few companies in the world who have the capability that the complete truck is built in modules, and each module has a different life cycle. So they are connected with each other, yeah, but there are standard linkages between the modules, like an engine or like the gearbox. But they have complete different life cycles, and they're different. Each model, of course, module has different variations. So you can exchange and can just simply say, okay, I update the engine, but the gearbox still stays the same, which gives you completely different capabilities going forward, how to configure your products. So, and that's something. And if you compare, for example, Scania with MAN, it means that Scania is twice as much efficient as MAN with 50% less resources and can faster develop even. Yeah, so and they're still producing similar products. But if you look at this comparison, it also shows you that configuring upfront and making your product portfolio as flexible as possible, as modular as possible, has a lot of benefits behind it, because you can change it. Yeah, while if you have a standard, let's say, platform, and you build all your components on one platform, you always need to change the platform, you need to change the complete product, and you have to redesign it and replace it by a new one. So I think that's why this modularization really in a full extent is, of course, something now companies starting from Dürr, DMG Mori, yeah, or Trumpf and others all are looking for that, yeah, to come to that stage, because they have all identified the need of coming to this kind of modularization from a picture, also to manage each variation and each module in a different way, depending on the requirements of the market.
What is the difference between PLM and CLM?
So the product lifecycle management, PLM, what is kind of Windchill, for example, as a tool, but it also as a process, means you manage the components over the life cycle. Your products, or let's say your components, your subsystems, your modules, or even for example a platform and so on. So that's really managing the products over the life cycle, which is very important. For example, if electronic components, they have a short life cycle, right? You have to replace them every 12, 18 months because they're not available on the market. If it's hardware, it's a longer life cycle, and so on. So that's the PLM side. And I just give also a third one, because it was not asked. The AL, application lifecycle management, is the same for the software, which means managing your software and the modules of the software. It is the same way, for example, Tesla is doing that very well, or let's say the Silicon Valley companies, the same way as you manage electronic hardware components. And this configuration lifecycle management is then how you combine the different components to a system. Yeah, what are the variations? How can I combine module A, module B, and module C? Can be one system. Give an example. If you have a base machine, yeah, for example, from Trumpf, giving that example, you have basically a base machine, you have a laser, and you have a robot for automation. And the base machine you can combine with different lasers and with a different automation. And that is the configuration of the solution. And how you configure that, that is something you can manage in the CLM. And that's basically how all these three elements play together.
Can the CLM send custom requirements back to PLM to design the product as per the customer's expectation, like, for example, engineering to order?
Yeah, I think so that there are two sides of the medal. So, for example, given the Krone case, for standard, for all what is pre-configured, for configured products which are CTO, that is of course something which is already in the backbone of a CLM, right? Because you have already configured all these variations, so they are already there in the configurator. So that's something, if you have a configurator, so that's something that's predefined. So of course this works already. There's already one exception. If you have, for example, a combination that you have never built before, that is already something you need to manage in a different workflow, making sure, okay, I have a configuration of 3 different modules, but I have never tested them together. That's probably exception 1 you need to manage. But the second one exception, and that's exactly what you were asking, when you have an engineer to order. So I have a customer wish, for example, which is not yet included in the configuration. Especially the machine needs to stand in a certain position at the shop floor, and therefore it needs to be designed in a little bit different way. Yeah, could be, or other requests. Then it's something that is, for example, in the Krone case, it is done in a self-learning database. So they have a workflow. If you have basically the configurator, and you have a certain let's say module which is not standard and is not pre-configured, then you have a free let's say a text field you need to enter in a certain semantic. You need to enter basically a customer request. It is going into a database that is checking if that customer request has been answered already somewhere before. If not, it goes basically into the manual process with an engineering team, which will basically look at that, will basically make all the updates on the drawing, and will send this back basically into the configuration. So that's something, and then you place the order so that you get it back to the configurator as an updated bill of material and an updated price, and then it will be passed over. But that's something you still have some certain manual workarounds, especially on engineer to order. But the idea is that with the so-called self-learning database, that it's always continuously updated. So the more that you have, if you have certain customer wishes which are coming more frequently, that you update basically your configuration with this feature, and then it's in the next, for the next order, it's already a standard one.
Can CLM provide an overview of the consequences of changing a product component in advance?
That's of course a little bit tricky to answer depending on from which perspective you're asking that question. I mean, if you're asking that question from a sales perspective, in the end, that's a different one if you ask it from an engineering perspective. But I try to answer that. I answer that. In the end, configuration lifecycle management has, of course, if it's fully embedded in the process for the product management, for example, it shows already, it can show a lot of the interdependencies. Yes, if it, so I think that it has a capability to do that. The question is, of course, in the, let's say, if you're in the sales, so that's the product management perspective, but it's internal. If you're now at the sales side and you're a sales configurator and you want to basically enter there, and it's always, we talk about predefined configuration. So there it can only tell you, okay, this solution is not a standard pre-configured CTO solution. So it needs to some ETO work, so engineer to order work. So some engineering folks need to look at this order. I think this will still be there. Yeah, but I think what you can learn from configuration lifecycle management, of course, you can see and analyze immediately which variations are more often bought, right? You can do analysis on what are the trends, are my trends of the customer orders basically changing. So all the things where you basically had a lot of work typically internally to identify what are market trends and so on. You can see, of course, with the CLM immediately what are my implications, which variants are are built or used and not so used. I think that's, for example, something if you're in the automotive industry, they all try on a manual way today to identify which option numbers are actually, do I need the yellow or the white leather seats? Are they important for 3 Series with a small engine, or are they actually only bought on the 3 Series with a big engine? Yeah, and these kind of things, you immediately have all this information. So for example, there you have a lot of benefits for the product management and for the, let's say, market strategy side.